Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story name: The 13th Stair. It was 11:53 p.m. when Sarah noticed the 13th step on her staircase for the first time. She had lived in her modest Victorian home for over 5 years, climbing those stairs to her bedroom every night without a single misstep. 12 steps. There had always been 12. But tonight, there was an extra one. The house groaned as if alive, the wood shifting under her bare feet as she hovered near the base of the staircase. The soft glow of her bedside lamp cast long shadows across the walls, stretching unnaturally into the corners. The 13th stair sat there, impossibly wedged between the 12th and the landing, as if it had always been there. "Must be tired," she whispered to herself, her voice wavering. She wasn't tired. She knew her house like the lines on her palms. But something about that step pulled her, like a splinter lodged in her mind. She put a hand on the railing and ascended slowly, counting aloud with every step. 1, 2, 3. Her voice echoed softly in the silence. 11, 12, 13. She stopped. The new step felt different beneath her foot, colder, softer. She crouched down and pressed her hand to it. It almost felt warm. A noise behind her shattered the silence, a faint, rasping breath. Sarah froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the stair. Slowly, she turned her head. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the air was heavier, pressing against her chest. The breath had been real. She was sure of it. That night, she dreamt of the staircase. In her dream, the steps stretched endlessly upward, spiraling into an inky void. On the 13th step, a pair of hands, ashen, thin and withered, clutched her ankle and pulled her downward. She woke with a gasp, her sheets damp with sweat. The next morning, Sarah tried to ignore the dream, the step, the breath. She reasoned it away: stress from work, too much coffee before bed. By the afternoon, she had almost convinced herself it was nothing. But when the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows of her home began to grow, she found herself staring at the staircase again. It was smaller now. The 13th step. She could swear it was shrinking, blending more seamlessly into the rest of the stairs. But it was still there, waiting for her. By the third night, the dreams worsened. The spiral staircase returned, but now, she wasn't alone. There was a figure at the top. Tall and cloaked in shadows, it watched her silently. When she tried to climb the stairs, her legs felt heavy, like wading through quicksand. The figure never moved, but its presence burned into her mind. By the fourth night, she couldn't take it anymore. She called her best friend, Natalie, desperate to share her experience. "It's just a weird dream, Sarah," Natalie said over the phone, her voice tinged with concern. "And the step? Maybe you just never noticed it before. These old houses are full of quirks." Sarah wanted to believe her, but Natalie's reassurance felt hollow. That evening, when the clock struck 11:53 p.m., Sarah stood at the base of the staircase, clutching a flashlight. "I need to see," she muttered to herself. "I need to know." She climbed the steps again, her fingers trailing along the worn wooden railing. This time, as she reached the 13th stair, she felt a vibration beneath her feet. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling. The light flickered. The air around her grew icy, and a sudden gust of wind blew through the house, though no windows were open. And then she heard it, a voice, faint and childlike, coming from below the stair. "Help me!" Sarah recoiled, dropping the flashlight. The beam swung wildly, casting distorted shadows across the walls. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She ran to the kitchen and grabbed a hammer. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, but she had to know what was under that stair. Returning to the staircase, she began prying at the edges of the 13th step. The wood gave way surprisingly easily, almost as if it wanted to be removed. Beneath it was a hollow space, and nestled inside was a small, decayed box. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were photographs, old, yellowed images of a family that looked disturbingly similar to her own. There was a woman, a man, and a little girl with curls framing her face. But the last photo made her stomach lurch. It was of her staircase. 12 steps. No more, no less. A cold breeze brushed past her neck, and a voice whispered directly into her ear, low and guttural. "You shouldn't have opened it." She whipped around, but no one was there. The staircase seemed to stretch infinitely now, the darkness above her yawning like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. She tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Something wrapped around her ankles, pulling her backward. She screamed, clawing at the steps, but the force was relentless. As she was dragged down, she looked up one last time. The 13th step shimmered, shifting back into the void, leaving nothing behind but an empty staircase. By the time Natalie came to check on her the next day, Sarah was gone. The house was eerily quiet, but the staircase stood as it always had. 12 steps. No more, no less. And yet, if you stood at the base of the stairs at 11:53 p.m. and listened closely, you could still hear Sarah's screams echoing from somewhere far, far away. Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah's voicemail had gone unanswered all day, and the eerie silence of the house when she arrived had set her teeth on edge. The door to the house had been unlocked. Natalie stepped inside cautiously, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. "Sarah?" she called out, her voice wavering. The house was cold, unnaturally so. It felt as though the air itself resisted her intrusion. The staircase loomed ahead, casting long, unnatural shadows across the dimly lit foyer. Natalie stared at it, dread pooling in her stomach. It was just a staircase. Wooden nails and paint. Yet something about it felt alive. "Get a grip, Nat," she muttered, forcing herself to move forward. She climbed the steps slowly, her heart pounding louder with each one. She counted as she ascended, just like Sarah had done. 1, 2, 3. She paused when she reached the 12th step. It felt normal, solid. There was no 13th step. She shook her head. Maybe Sarah had been imagining things. But then, as she turned to head back down, something shifted. The air thickened, pressing against her like an unseen weight. A faint creak echoed from behind her, and she turned to see the 13th step materialize before her eyes, sliding into place like a puzzle piece. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her mind racing. The step hadn't been there seconds ago, and yet now it sat in perfect alignment with the others, as though it had always been part of the staircase. "Sarah?" Natalie called again, her voice cracking. The house didn't respond. But then, faintly, she heard something, a soft, distant cry, like someone sobbing. It seemed to come from beneath the staircase. She knelt, pressing her ear to the wood. The crying grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just crying, it was pleading. A woman's voice, broken and raw. "Help me, please?" Natalie recoiled, scrambling back up the stairs. Her mind screamed at her to leave, but something stronger, some deep, inexplicable urge, kept her rooted to the spot. She reached into her bag, fumbling for her phone. The screen flickered as she turned on the flashlight app, casting a weak beam across the steps. Her hands trembled as she crouched down to examine the 13th step. It looked just like the others, but when she pressed her fingers to it, it felt warm, almost alive. Her pulse raced as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small pocket knife. She didn't know what she was doing, but she felt compelled to act. Carefully, she began prying at the edges of the step. The wood peeled back easily, revealing the same hollow space Sarah had discovered. Inside, Natalie found the small, decayed box, just as Sarah had described during their last phone call. Her stomach twisted as she opened it. The photographs spilled out into her lap. Her breath caught as she stared at the images. They were of Sarah, taken inside this very house. In one, Sarah stood in the kitchen, smiling as she cooked. In another, she was sitting on the couch, laughing at something off camera. But the last photo made Natalie's blood run cold. It was a picture of her, standing at the base of the staircase, looking up. Her flashlight flickered, and the air grew colder. The sobbing voice beneath the staircase turned into laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. Natalie dropped the photos, stumbling backward. She turned to run, but the house had other plans. The walls seemed to shift, closing in around her. The staircase stretched upward, its steps twisting and spiraling into darkness. "Natalie," a voice called from above. She froze. It was Sarah's voice, but it sounded wrong, distorted, as though it were being dragged through static. "Sarah?" Natalie called, her voice trembling. "Come up," the voice urged. "I'm waiting for you." Natalie hesitated, every instinct in her body screaming at her to run. But the voice was so familiar, so desperate. Against her better judgment, she placed one foot on the 13th step. As soon as her weight shifted onto it, the step gave way, crumbling like ash beneath her foot. She screamed as she fell, tumbling into darkness. When she landed, the air was cold and damp. She was no longer in the house. Around her, the walls seemed to pulse, shifting and breathing like living flesh. The faint glow of her phone illuminated the space, revealing a long, narrow corridor lined with doors. From behind each door came muffled voices, some crying, some laughing, some screaming. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the floor beneath her felt slick and sticky. "Natalie," the voice called again, this time from the end of the corridor. She turned her flashlight toward the sound, her heart hammering in her chest. At the far end of the hall, she saw a figure. Sarah, or at least something that looked like her. "Help me," the figure whispered, reaching out a hand. But as Natalie stepped closer, the figure began to change. Its skin peeled away, revealing a skeletal frame beneath. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "Too late," it hissed, lunging toward her. Natalie screamed, but before she could move, the corridor dissolved around her, plunging her into darkness once more. When she woke, she was lying at the base of the staircase in Sarah's house. The 13th step was gone. The house was silent, but as she stood and dusted herself off, she noticed something new. In her hand was a photograph, one she hadn't seen before. It was a picture of her, standing in the corridor, the skeletal figure looming behind her. And in the background, faint but unmistakable, was the 13th step. If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here the darkness is always waiting just for you.